Talk to me about how you discovered sound and music and what that means to you.
So I think I've been somebody who's always been had a soundtrack. There's always something playing in my experience. And so it's always come to me quite naturally, I think, working with sound. I became quite interested in the science of entrainment, the idea that by tuning to a frequency, we can adjust our own mental or physical state.
100, yeah.
Frequencies that are reported to literally affect the body.
I think it's interesting then to talk about, you as an artist, particularly as I mentioned black and queer. And I'm struggling with these things. And we were talking about how black queer almost has to have its own kind of category or space. Not black and queer, that's different. You know what I mean? But black queer.
My way of relating to that term has definitely evolved over the years. In my early work, I was very much trying to grasp and seek out language. I'm not so interested in locating or fixing what these things are. I guess I think about them more as spaces rather than things that I want to be defined by. I definitely think the spaces I create are very black. I'm very intentional about making sure there's a lot of blackness in my work. The art world is kind of predicated on this idea of the white cube. And that's kind of what I was taught, that art begins with a white cube. So I think I always needed to have a black wall.
I know you've had a big relationship with your body, kind of the way you've trained and worked with it. Has your art been influenced by that relationship at all? Has it changed?
I remember at uni, I was looking in the textiles archive and I was like, why am I not seeing black people, doing these things? So a lot of that early work was me inserting myself into these images of people knitting and doing cross stitch. And that's when I realized I'm a performer. With my early work, I was very much reflecting on what it was to be often perceived as male, but not necessarily identifying as male. There'd definitely been work where I was taking on a more kind of confrontational position around how I am perceived. It's funny because actually now I occupy what I guess is perceived as a physically strong body. I actually feel more like I can present more feminine, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's interesting what's happened. And I guess also being very aware of how that's then perceived.
Could you just talk to me about your relationship with Ruckus and how that started and what that means to you?
For me, arriving, at LMA and getting to experience something like the Ruckus was it blew my mind in a lot of ways. This idea of the existing records. And I'm curious why and how. Why did you start the archive?
First of all, it's a friendship between two artists that we created, Ruckus Federation. It was what you've just said, a space that we wanted to kind of take up space and occupy the space as black queer people, to be irrefutable that we were here. Not only within the black cultural, historical context, but also in the queer context, but also in the British context, because we were claiming a British space. So there was. We always say there was a politics behind it. It's not devoid of politics. One of the things I used to do, which I did this weekend, is go clubbing. It's something that kind of vibes with you in terms of, there's some dance work or dance sculptural work in the exhibition, which I'm really excited to see the manifestation of.
Because my first experiences of clubbing were not queer spaces. They were very much about a space to rave. So I think, discovering a black queer space was at the same time, transformative, but also very disappointing, actually, if I'm honest. In London, at that point, a lot of the clubs were just playing dancehall. You were happy to be there because it was all black queer people, but actually you were also taking in music that was sometimes really violent towards us. I think because I'm somebody that actually really pays attention to what I'm listening to, that was a lot to get my head around. I'm very much of the opinion. It's if the thing that you want to see doesn't exist, you got to create it. There's always elements of it in my work because I love the idea of also bringing it into the exhibition space, these kind of like these moments where actually I have found a lot of joy and pleasure, and also all the other like not so great stuff. As somebody who spends a lot of time imagining, hoping, visioning, you know, wanting to see different kinds of images, different kinds of experiences, you know, different kinds of ways of being. That's definitely something like I advocate for in my being, you know, in my presence as a human.